first thing you want to find out is who is your audience. And that seems like common sense, but it's often a neglected standpoint.
Welcome to Lifeside Continuum. Today, I get a chance to speak with Noel Lumpkin, anesthesiologist, author, freelance medical writer, and content strategist.
Now, and people aren't going to be able to necessarily recite the litany of benefits, but if you tell them the story, they're going to remember that.
In this episode, we talk about why medical device companies miss the mark on messaging.
Two people could understand it in completely different ways and be completely right, but one of them is completely wrong. You have to define terms that you think are understandable to everybody so that it is relatable to everyone.
And how they can better connect with their audiences, including patients, clinicians, and stakeholders, by simplifying complex topics, earning the audience's trust, and overcoming our natural resistance to change.
When you're speaking to your patients, don't be a megaphone, be a mirror, and listen to what they're saying to you. Use terms that they understand.
All right, let's go. Thanks for hopping on with me today, Noel.
Sure.
For the audience who doesn't know who you are, give us a little bit of background on you. How did you get here today?
Well, I'm a retired anesthesiologist with over 2 decades of experience, and much of that in the field of locum tenens, which is traveling for physicians. And several years ago, I wrote a book called Road Warrior Physician to detail how this all works. And it taught me the value of communicating concepts in a clear and coherent way. And as I've transitioned out of medicine, I've now transitioned into writing to bring information to everybody so it is more accessible.
So you work with people in the space to help them communicate more clearly, to help them write and do writing for them. What are some of the things that are driving that need today, do you think?
Well, I think that for most people, medicine is a complex subject. Even for those of us in medicine, it is complex. And the talent that I think I've been working on is developing, communicating those ideas so that the complex becomes more understandable. Because I think, especially in medicine, when people are better informed, they make better decisions.
Okay, so really your focus and your superpower is on bringing clarity to, subjects and topics that can often really be complex.
Yes, I think that on both sides of the equation, there's often a misunderstanding. People think they're saying one thing, but the audience may not be understanding that at all. And medicine and numerous fields have jargon that is completely obtuse to the average individual. And I think if you can take that information and make it into terms that are understandable to one another. Someone once told me, when you're speaking to your patients, don't be a megaphone, be a mirror. And listen to what they're saying to you. Use terms that they understand so that then I think when we talk to patients in a way that they understand, there's less fear and there's more trust.
Right. And you have a background, being in the room as an anesthesiologist. What do you think that experience has enabled you as far as creating content, as far as writing? How does that help you or better position you to help your clients today?
Well, I think that as an anesthesiologist, I had the experience and the privilege really of taking care of people at probably for most people the most terrifying moment in their lives, and being able to understand and talk to people at those times and do it many times over. I figured one day I had probably taken care of over 25,000 patients. So I've listened to stories, I've watched what people tell me, and I've listened to how they told me stories. And I think that develops a certain amount of empathy. So you understand what the fears are, what drives people's concerns when it comes to something as terrifying as surgery. And also in the operating room, I see that sometimes surgeons and or nurses are saying one thing that isn't really being understood by the other party. And as an anesthesiologist, you have the ability to stand in the background and watch the whole movie unfold, as it were, because I think that sometimes people are just so caught up in their own goals and their own mission that they are ignoring what's going on around them. And anesthesia
Right.
gives you more of the global picture. I've always likened it to flying a plane. I don't know if you've ever flown a plane, but you get up in the air and you have to look at all these monitors, but you also have to look out the window and see what's going on around you. Otherwise, you can be crashing to the ground. And anesthesia is a lot like that. There's a lot to keep an eye on, and most of the time it is goes very smoothly. And but it is keeping that global view that I think is helpful.
Right. I think it's one of those. I think it's one of those roles where, it's kind of like you said, it's quiet, it's in the background, and when everything is going well, you simply don't notice it necessarily. It's when things start to get chaotic that um, you you have to step in and you become present sort of in that environment. And I think being having that sort of background view of the whole picture, and being able to pick out exactly the details in the chaos, I think is key, and it helps in what you're doing today.
Yes, I think so. I think that, especially today with new technology coming out, people are so focused on the product that they're not thinking about, well, how does this apply to the average individual? We get so focused on the what or the how that we forget about the why. I think a lot of things come out and people think this is great, this is the latest and greatest. But if people can't understand why they need it, they aren't going to buy into your product or your service.
Exactly. I think, thinking about the work that we do sort of collectively, um, you know, uh, founders, product leaders, sometimes they can struggle communicating the value of what they're bringing to the market. Founders, especially, envision themselves as the customer, and they sort of get to a point, and I've talked about this before, they get to the point where they're not the customer anymore. And I think that clinicians and tech founders, and med device teams, I think they really struggle sometimes with communicating. And that's what you do, is you help them communicate better. Why again? I think you've said it a little bit before, but why again do you think they struggle so much?
Well, I think that is as developers and clinicians, we can often get tunnel vision. We know what we do it very well, and and while that makes us good at what we do, it makes us sometimes oblivious to what is going around us. And I think that you get so focused on, like I say, on the what, on the tech, that you forget to translate the intent. Why is this important? Why is this going to make a difference? And put yourself in their shoes and see how this works. For instance, I designed a brochure for an app that a company over in Germany had developed for patients with a form of late stage cancer to manage their symptoms. And they give me a stack of journal articles describing how this worked, the studies that had been done, and all the information was there. But if we handed those off to patients, they would just be throwing those things in the trash because it's too much jargon and no one cares about research methodology or statistical analysis. What they want to know is, how does this work? Why do I need this? And to say, well, it's to manage your symptoms, they're like, so what? And they're like, no, this will help you manage your symptoms so that you don't have to go to the doctor as often, so that you have more time to take care of things at home. Oh, oh, that makes sense then. Then I understand. And I think it's taking all that information and looking at it from a different angle. And I think that's where the global view of anesthesia helps you look at it, not just from your standpoint, but the surgeon standpoint, the nurse's standpoint, and most importantly, the patient standpoint.
So you're really in a good spot to look through different lenses and get kind of multiple viewpoints of the problem or the situation at hand. And I think sometimes, more technical, or clinical or engineer driven founders can struggle with that a little bit. What do you think are the bigger implications for them, if they don't nail their messaging, if they aren't considering the user, whether it's another professional in the space or a patient? What does that look like?
Well, I think that if you aren't crafting your message clearly and for your audience, I think then they may miss the point entirely, and your great invention may be completely ignored through no fault of your own necessarily. Your design might be great, but your message has to be there. And these days, people are increasingly skeptical about new products and new services. And you really have to speak their language. And I think that has been driven home to me on several occasions where it's simply a misunderstanding of a term or a concept. For instance, before I went to medical school, if someone said to me AAA, I would think, oh, you have a flat tire, or you need your car jump started, or you need a tow. After medical school, AAA to me means an abdominal aortic aneurysm, which can be a condition that is monitored, a condition that is requiring surgery, or a condition that is requiring emergent surgery. And if I said, we have AAA, two people could understand it in completely different ways and be completely right, but one of them is completely wrong in what this actually means. And so I think that you have to define terms that you think are understandable to everybody so that it is relatable to everyone.
I think that's a really, really good point in that we have to speak to our audience, whether it's an investor or another clinician or a patient, on their terms. We have to put them at the center of the conversation. It's less
Okay.
about us. It's less about our
It's
product.
not about us. Yes, exactly.
Quick interruption. I've got an offer for med device and life science companies doing at least 3 million a year, but dealing with growth challenges. The first step is really easy. Just connect with me on LinkedIn. The details are below. The rest is to follow. That's it. Let's get back to the podcast. I think when we spoke before, you told me a story about a mercy ship in Congo. Tell me that story again.
Well, I've done some medical missions, and I went with Mercy Ship several years ago and went to the Republic of Congo. And when I went over there, I knew that there are people from all over the world that serve on Mercy Ship. So I knew I would hear a lot of different languages. In fact, they put up on the board this week, we have 45 different countries represented on the Mercy Ship. And so I knew I would hear other languages. I didn't realize that one of the foreign languages I would hear was English. We had people from the UK, we had people from Australia, we had people from New Zealand. And even though we all spoke English, we had different terms that we used for the same thing. And so it became a need to translate. It's not trash, it's rubbish. It's not the operating room, it's the theater. And I think that's another thing that's, and it's, we think that, oh, just because we all speak English, that we all understand things the same way. And we don't. And you can see that as a parent or as a teacher, you think, surely you understand this. And no, not always. And I think we often assume, and as Neil Simon famously said in The Odd Couple, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. And so I think too often people assume too much.
Yeah, and I think that happens too. Sometimes it's tough to get out of our own head, and put ourselves in the shoes of the audience. And when you're person to person, you can read their expression. You engage with them and get their input, and you can see if they're understanding the point you're making and if it's
Right.
relevant and if you're getting your point across. When we're dealing with things like a website or a downloaded you know case study or brochure or app note in some cases, we don't have that benefit, and it's on us as a founder or the marketing team or whoever, to get in front of the user and anticipate their frame of mind and their perspective and the lens that they see the world through. And I think that's an important point you make, that we might all speak the same language, but we have different variables at different levels, including different language and labels we use for the same thing. With what you're doing, you work with clinicians and technical founders today to craft their messaging to help them communicate so that they're more audience or patient centric. Tell me a little bit about what that looks like. Maybe what is the process that you go through with the client?
Well, I think you just mentioned the first thing you want to find out is who is your audience. And that seems like common sense, but it's often a neglected standpoint. When I first started writing, I joined Toastmasters just because someone mentioned, oh, I might have to talk about my book. And I was far from being a public speaker. One of the first things that Toastmasters drives home is who is your audience? Because that drives everything. It's literally starting at the end and working backwards. Because if my audience is a group of clinicians, I can speak in a way and about certain things that we understand as clinicians without delving into all the definitions. Whereas if my audience is a group of patients, or a general audience, then I need to speak about things in a different way, not necessarily not dumbing things down, but talk about more generalities and how this applies to them. Just like, as I mentioned with the app that I wrote the brochure for, I wrote that one for patients, but I would write a different one for clinicians, because the fact that their patients is managing their side effects is great. They'd be, oh, fine, that's wonderful. But what they want to know is, how is that going to affect me? And if I say to them, if they're not having to call your office constantly, if they're not having to make unnecessary trips to the emergency room or to your office, that is one, going to save you time, it's going to save you headache, and it's going to reduce the stress on your staff. Oh, well, there again, the light bulb goes on. Now I understand how this works. So yes, I will talk to my patients about this. So it is putting yourself in their shoes first before you try and write the message.
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, the difference between communicating with a fellow clinician and a patient is a clear one. They're kind of worlds apart as far as understanding and the key points that you want to make. Because if we're selling in quotes to those different audiences, those would be different value propositions. Um, in my experience, though, selling into the healthcare system, you're not selling to one clinician. You're selling into a system. You're selling into a pool of influencers and decision makers and stakeholders. Um, what are your thoughts on maybe the nuances of communicating to a more diverse pool of stakeholders? Any thoughts or recommendations?
For all of us, no matter where we are, patients, clinicians, stakeholders, hospital executives, everybody has a pain point. And I think most of us could agree these days, what we want is something that is either going to save us time or save us money or save us paperwork. And I think if you can focus in on alleviating someone's pain, because the studies have shown you're going to get more results if you reduce someone's pain than if you increase their pleasure. Even though that seems counterintuitive, really that is what it boils down to, is what is your pain point and how can we address that in an effective manner with whatever it is we're offering, a product, a service, a website, an app.
Exactly. So you sort of bring to mind an experience we had a few years ago with a company that was really out of startup mode. They had quite a bit of funding. They had an incredible breakthrough biotech product, and they had the early adopters. They had the KOLs. They had those people who
Mm-hmm.
were really at the edge of where medicine is, and they seem to really struggle with getting through to the systems and getting through to the rest of the community, as far as clinicians go. And so in going through the different audiences and the different needs and the challenges, we found that one of their big pain points collectively as the whole system is the recurrence of a hospital revisit from a patient who had been operated on using a competitor's product, and that process, without getting into the details, would cause infection and pain and inflammation, and so patients kept coming back for revisits and in some case reoperation, and our product eliminated that. So being able to communicate the problem or the pain point, which in this case was actually quite extended out there, but included the whole system. The entire hospital system was concerned with the cost of the patient revisit. So being able to map and communicate the benefits of your product, but to the needs of the bigger system, the overarching needs, I think is pretty powerful. It's not about one specific little thing that your widget or your therapy does. You look to the outcomes. You look at the bigger implications.
Right.
Given your experience, do you have any stories or examples you could share, confidentially, of course, where you've seen something like that, where changing the approach to communication has really had an impact?
Well, I think that one thing that I've seen recently, one of the big pain points for locum tenens is what's called credentialing. And that's where you get privileges at a hospital. And when I first started doing this over 20 years ago, it would take 2 weeks, maybe a month for me to get privileges. These days, it takes 6 months to a year to get credentials, even if your record is clean, as we say.
Wow.
And in spite of that, we have this huge physician shortage nationwide in virtually every specialty. And I thought there has to be a way to reduce the amount of time it takes. And I recently went to a summit with a company, and they presented this credentialing software that is very straightforward and can collect online your work history and so forth, which is something that takes hours to get inputted into this complicated software. And I did just some brief research and shows that on average, the physician shortage is costing a single hospital $9,000 a day in lost revenue.
Wow.
And if this software could be implemented, this could be a huge cost saving. So you want to market it to me, you say, hey, this is going to save you time, headache, everything is here, it's ready to go. Instead of taking days going through everything, it's going to take me minutes. I literally went through and did the entire process in less than an hour. To me, saving my time, because my time is money, is going to be a huge thing. But for the hospital, if you can get qualified physicians on board more quickly, you're going to be able to see more patients. You're going to reduce the backlog we've had literally since the pandemic and alleviate a lot of people's suffering. So that's something that I've only seen recently that I'm like, this could be huge. This could be huge.
Yeah, that's impressive. And what I see typically with a founder looking to message and communicate the value of a product like that is they'll focus on a feature that they're particularly enamored with. Like they love so much that they have
Yes.
created this thing,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll speak to the problem a little bit, but it's sort of the immediate problem. And what we see is that often when we talk about those individual or smaller problems, for the rest of the world, they're maybe less important. They don't get our attention. We're surrounded by millions of problems every day. And when we come in and we say, hey, we have a tool that has this feature that we're really proud of, and we solve this or we address this small problem, it just doesn't cut through the noise. It's not, in some cases, it's not a big enough problem. Maybe we don't recognize that it's a problem, or maybe I just can't get other people in the system. Like, I love it and I would use this, but I can't get other people, other stakeholders in the system to care about that one problem to make a huge institutional shift to whatever that product is. And I think when you can speak to that higher level and go beyond that one feature and that one small problem that you address to the bigger overarching systemic issues that are impacted with your solution, I think you have a better chance on selling into the system.
No, I agree. I think that, if you are designing something, you do get enamored, as you say, or wedded to your product or service, and you tend to lose sight, like I said, become oblivious to what else might be important. And I think with every situation, it's important to speak to your audience and find out what exactly is their biggest concern, because sometimes we are clueless at what is the biggest problem that people are facing. And like, as I've mentioned, having gone on medical missions, it's not, it is superfluous to talk to patients about regular medical visits when they are living on $25 a month and they're just trying to put food on the table. You need to address that part first before you start talking about the higher level stuff. It's like the Maslow hierarchy. Address the basic needs first, and then you can get up to the higher level stuff. And it is time to, I think, when you've developed something, to step back from it and let someone else take a look at it. And it can be very humbling, because sometimes people say, well, I don't like this, or this doesn't make any sense to me. And you could take offense at it, and you're like, no, you have to separate yourself from the product and realize this product isn't for you. You might have spent hours. This might be the equivalent of your firstborn, but you need to understand how this is designed for other people, and so you must speak to those people first.
That's actually a brilliant point, in that when we the moment that we decide to take action and create a product that is a solution to a need, we're not the customer anymore. We have different lenses we look at the world through. There's different wiring in here, because not everybody, most people would never take the steps to recognize there's a problem there, I should solve it, and I should carry on to build a company and a business around this. That's not everyone. That's not typical. So it is important to note that difference. And again, the patients are a completely different animal in this space. So they have a whole different set of needs. And having, I think somebody who can be a bridge between the science or the medicine or the technology, and then the end beneficiary, the end user or patient, and can really get into their head and their experience, I think is really important. Because as a maybe as a more technical person, as a scientist
Mm-hmm.
or a clinician, you have a lot going on. We're really busy, and you want to solve it all, but you only have so much bandwidth, and so you need partners like you to help build those bridges.
I think so. I think, like you mentioned, everyone's time is short, but for clinicians, particularly if you're working in an operating room environment, I used to laugh at people who would say, oh, can I talk to you during your lunch hour? And I'm like, you don't understand. I don't get a lunch hour. I don't get a lunch half hour. And in fact, most days I don't even get lunch. If you want to tell me something, it's like the Jack Webb, just the facts, man. Break it down to what I need to know and do it quickly. And here they come with their glossy brochures and their stacks of studies, and you're like, yeah, no, that isn't going to work for me. And I think that's where I think we think, oh yes, designing these beautiful presentations are meaningless if no one's going to take the time to listen to it or watch it.
Right. And I think there's a lot of talk right now about the limited accessibility or the limited attention span. And it's not about the person, it's
Mm-hmm.
about the environment that we're in. I mean, we talk about, okay, we glance at our phone and we make judgments in fractions of a second.
Right.
But in the real world environment, everybody's really, really busy and running around. And when you have the opportunity to pitch your product or get in front of somebody, you have to be really smart and really efficient, and almost immediately be able to contextualize what you want to say so that it cuts through and it has the biggest impact with that person you're speaking with.
Yeah, I think that's the whole idea of the elevator pitch. You want to tell someone what you can do or about your product, and do it in the time it takes to go up to the next floor. And I think that's where I think distilling the information is important. And I think that's what I think I try and do, is take your product, your information, and distill it into facts that are concise and coherent for whatever audience you have. In and I think that as an anesthesiologist, maybe that is part of the training, is that whereas clinicians might have a 15 or 30-minute block to talk to someone in an exam room, I typically had 5 to 10 minutes. I had to get the information I needed, tell them what they needed to know about their anesthesia, and then be ready to go. And there was no time for long chit chats. It was a focused interview, but I think that's what helps with doing that over and over is learning how to look at information, get the questions I have those answered, and keep moving. And that is a different focus. Anesthesia is one of the specialties like emergency medicine or so forth, where it has to be a focused interview. And for this kind of information and for these kinds of products, I think that is a benefit of my specialty.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Let's take a minute and think about our audience and what they're looking to achieve here, and talk about some suggestions that you have for them. So, I understand that a lot of us, again, work with more uh, technical minded founders. So, again, a clinician or an engineer, or a scientist, and they can often really, really be focused on the product. Some of what we've been talking about, the customer centricity, the patient-centric communications, for example, um, that can be hard for us to communicate to the founder that this is something that's important for us to do. You have quite a bit of experience with this. What is a quick tip or suggestion for somebody who's in those shoes trying to communicate to that founder? We should really be focused on this, and not just do the exercise, but take that feedback. What's a recommendation there?
Well, I think like we've discussed before, I think for especially for the technically minded, the scientists and the developers who are so hyper focused on their product and forgetting that, oh, we have to convey this information to the outside world. I think a simple way to get people to talk about their product in a different way is, well, can I ask your opinion? That phrase alone is something that will everyone loves to give their opinion. I mean, people give their opinions freely on social media all the time. Everyone wants to be asked their opinion. So that's the first thing to sort of break through sometimes that wall that they have around it, if they're feeling that you may not be understanding them. And then I think that for a new product, I would ask, can I ask your opinion? How would you describe this to your mother? Why does she need this? Why would she want this? And I think that one of the values that I have learned both as a writer and in Toastmasters is that a lot of times if we want to convey a message, what we need to do is tell a story. So with a product that it's a new product, say, well, why did you develop this? And then a lot of times a story will come out. Well, I was working in an environment where this wasn't working, or I realized there was a lack, and this is why I've developed that. That's a powerful message. And that's often lost in the development. They've so focused on the product or the service that they have forgotten the why. And that's what I mentioned early on. People will accept almost any what or any how if they understand the why.
Right. I'll say something that I find when I do the persona and voice of customer work, and getting founders to tell us their story is the baseline, so that we have something to map against. Um, they'll The first time around, a founder will often gloss over that initial part of their journey that got things going, and that is the why.
Yes,
And often
exactly.
that's, like you said, it's the most important part, but they want to just rush right into that moment where they had that scientific breakthrough, or they created the widget in the garage, or whatever it was they did. They want to get to that moment, and the circumstances around getting to the point where you woke up one day and said, I've got to figure this out. I've got to solve this problem. We can't deal with it anymore, and it's me. That is a really powerful story, and sets a lot of amazing companies apart from a lot of technical noise in the industry.
Yeah, and I think, I was fortunate that I grew up with all four of my grandparents. And the one thing I can say about each of them, even though they were completely different, is they were great storytellers. and stories resonate with people at all ages, in all languages, all over. And I think that that's where, with each new development, the first thing you want to know is, what is the story behind this? And it's not like, oh, I just woke up and I decided I was going to create this. No, that doesn't tell anything. That doesn't tell the why. And I think that's the thing, is each person has a story they have to tell. Each product has a story to tell. And discerning that is what can create a message that resonates.
Thinking back through some of the work that I've done over the last so many years, um, some of I would say all of our most successful trade journal ad campaigns, and it's really hard to get success with a trade journal ad because typically you have a picture of the device or the therapy or what have you, and a bulleted list of features and specs and a generic website URL. All of our successful campaigns were things that you didn't expect to see in a medical journal. We've shown bears attacking families at picnics as a metaphor, and these are kind of bold and crazy campaigns, but they're the campaigns that work. And having those be rooted in the core why of the product, and tying your value to the why in your story. I can't stress enough how powerful that is. One more feature set isn't going to ring the bell for a lot of these people.
No, and people aren't going to be able to necessarily recite the litany of benefits, but if you tell them the story, they're going to remember that. People remember things that they've heard as a story. You think of all the stories that you've heard, and then think about how many facts you've memorized for school and so forth. And unless there's a story attached to them, those facts, they start to fade, but the stories remain.
Right. They're very, very sticky and powerful. Thinking back through a couple of tips that you have for communicating your story or your value or to different markets. Let's talk quickly about problem versus product.
Well, I think, as we mentioned, with your product, you want to talk with what is the end result, and then work backwards. This is going to fix this. So what is the problem? And then this is how this product is going to fix that problem. I think that it's working backwards. I think, as we mentioned, start with the end result and then work from there as far as how things proceed.
Okay. And that sort of goes back to the why in the storytelling. So understanding that people aren't out there hunting for your particular one feature. They're out there looking to solve a problem. And so starting the conversation there is a way to fast track.
Exactly. And I think, first of all, is one, addressing a problem. And sometimes it is even telling them that they have a problem. Sometimes people don't realize that there is a problem. I think we talked about, for us in the operating room, to keep people warm, we used to put warm blankets on them, and it was very minimal efforts. And then one day someone said, oh, if we could keep warm air blowing over them, we could make them more comfortable. It was essentially taking a hairdryer and putting it through a blanket. And these bear huggers became a novel when I first started residency, and now they're ubiquitous. Every hospital has them because studies have shown that keeping patients warmer brings better outcomes. We didn't even know it was a problem under the fact that patients were shivering. Now we realize, oh, here is the answer to a problem we didn't even know was a real problem until now. And so I think, yes, find out what the problem is, but also sometimes tell them you have a problem, you're just not aware of it. And so part of it is raising awareness.
I think a quick way to identify that and attach it to your communications is if you ever hear somebody say, well, that's how we've always done it.
Oh, yeah.
That's a huge opportunity.
Huge. Oh, absolutely.
To hop on that problem education point in the process. I think what we're talking about high level is stages of brand awareness, and you're diving into the space where sometimes the market just doesn't know it has a problem. They've always done it
Right.
that way, and they've just
Right.
dealt with it. And when you're coming in with a solution and you have a particular feature, announcing that feature to the world doesn't necessarily wake people up from a problem that they've just always dealt with. You really have to do the work and map it back for them.
Right. Well, and I think, when we think about something like cell phones, I mean, I grew up when phones were attached to the wall. And the idea of a phone that you carried with you, I'm like, why would I want that? Why would I need the phone with me all the time? And nowadays, we can't imagine not having cell phones because Apple had the very big concept of think different. And they showed us something that was novel. And at first we thought, oh, this is cute. But then we realized, oh, there's a lot more that can be done with this. So, I mean, Apple is a great example of how you take a product that people didn't know they needed and now they can't live without.
Talk a little bit about avoiding revolutionary language.
I think that clarity is a concept that is often overlooked. People have catchphrases that they want to use that they think are going to ring true with their audience. And the fact of the matter is, people want straightforward facts. Why does this work? Why do I need this? How will this make a difference? And I think the founders should spend their time on their innovation and let specialists translate those words into meanings that stick.
What is one piece of advice you have for clinical or life science tech oriented founders? What would you say to them if you had 30 seconds alone with them?
I would say spend your time focusing on your design because that is your strength. But remember that you're going to need someone to help convey the message out there. So don't be afraid to seek help to convey the message you want to convey. You can't do it all, and you shouldn't do it all.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. We will include links to connect with you below the video, so we'll connect people that way. Thank you so much, Noel. It was great speaking
Oh,
with
well,
you
thank
today.
you. This is great. It's great talking to you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. So thank you.
If you made it here, thank you. If you haven't already, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you want to learn more about this topic, I expand on it below, as well as in my LinkedIn newsletter. That's all for now. More soon.